You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with journalist and author Christina Patterson and former advisor to Boris Johnson, Kulveer Ranger. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. The Sun leading with the headline, Matt finished, and the news of Matt Hancock's departure from his position as Health Secretary. The Mirror also running with the same headline, referring to the Health Secretary and his aide's sudden exit. Gone. Hancock quits after day of humiliation. That's the headline in The Observer. The Telegraph leads on Matt Hancock's statement about sticking to his own COVID guidelines. And the Express also going with that, and the headline, Hancock forced to quit. Tears of a clown, that's the headline for The Star. The Times says humiliated Hancock quits and includes the claim that the former Health Secretary ended his marriage just hours before his affair was exposed. And on the front of the Mail, Hancock quits his job and marriage. Well, we're joined tonight by Christina Patterson and Kulveer Ranger. Welcome to both of you. We'll start with that Observer front page. Hancock quits after day of humiliation. Christina, did he have any other option?
Not by this point, he didn't know, because the support had drained away from the party, from MPs and from the public. And I think many Tory MPs have been keeping quiet about it. Do you remember when the Dominic Cummings affair happened last May? Then there were all these staged tweets of support from across the spectrum, but this time none of that. And they feared it was already turning into a Barnard Castle situation, and he had to go. I mean, you know, he clearly, unfortunately, is a lying cheat and hypocrite, and he had no choice, because he told the whole country that we were not allowed to even hug people outside our household, let alone do what he was apparently doing in that footage. But I think, well, at this time, he did have to go, but I just feel desperately sorry for his wife and children. I think, you know, even when someone goes, when it's clear they do have to go, it's never, you can't just sit and gloat, because there are people whose lives have been blown apart by this, actually. And my heart just goes out to his family and his wife, who must be going through absolute hell at the moment.
Kulveer, he did initially say that when he apologised, that he wanted to stay, he wanted to continue what he had started and bring the country out of the pandemic. He had the confidence of the Prime Minister. What do you think changed?
Well, I think, you know, I've known Matt Hancock for a number of years, actually, since he worked for George Osborne. And, you know, he's a hugely detailed, committed politician. He has been all his life. And I think it's hard when you're at the centre of a storm of something like this to see what's actually happening around you, the full consequence when it becomes so personal and so associated with you. And at that point, I think you lose a bit of perspective. So I think there's a period of time when something like this happens where the people that are right at the centre of it aren't really fully aware of what the impact it's having around them and in the broader environment. And as that becomes clearer, I think it dawns on them the situation, and that's why he has done exactly the right thing today and resigned. And
Christina, we know that although he has apologised, I mean, that there have been personal developments. We believe that it is officially now a separation from his wife. The personal side is, as you alluded to before, is where you really do feel sympathy for all those involved.
Absolutely. And to be informed that your husband has been having an affair, but you're only being informed because it's about to hit all the headlines, must be absolutely dreadful. And one of the reports says that Matt Hancock woke up his 8-year-old daughter, I think this is in the Sunday Times, to tell her that he was leaving their mother. I mean, devastating for the children. So, yes, there are always, you know, people, humans at the heart of a situation like this, and my heart absolutely goes out to them. But but I do find it, of course, it's an incredibly stressful job and people do fall in love with other people. But I just think the abject hypocrisy of the whole thing is quite breathtaking. And the fact that he wasn't going to resign. Anyone with a shred of honour would have resigned. Well, frankly, anyone with a shred of honour wouldn't have been operating with such hypocrisy. Even if they'd fallen in love with someone, they wouldn't have been actively, as has allegedly been the case, conducting an affair under the noses of their colleagues and staff while standing on a platform almost every day saying, you must not breach the guidelines. And not just guidelines. According to one report, the reason he had to resign was because there were reports of police having to look into it. This is not just guidance. This is the law. People were being fined £10,000, or at least having the threat of £10,000 fines for breaking the law on this. So it is pretty breathtaking and very upsetting when so many people have made such enormous sacrifices during this time. Weddings cancelled, funerals not allowed to happen, wakes tiny. I had my brother's wake in November, and we had 4 of us standing by the grave. We couldn't even go to a pub for lunch. But we know what Matt Hancock was doing. I'm sorry, but it makes me absolutely furious.
Christina, I'm so sorry to hear about your loss. Kulveer, I suppose Matt Hancock has admitted to that hypocrisy. We see in the Sunday Telegraph the headline there, those of us who make these rules have got to stick by them. So in the end, he was admitting that he had been a complete hypocrite.
He has. He has owned up. He has apologised. But I think he has also resigned, and he has done the honourable thing. But I agree with Christina. There'll be a lot of people in the country who'll be very angry because they looked to the Secretary of State for leadership. They looked to the Secretary of State for confidence in his decision-making and trusting him in terms of what he was telling them. And I think, firstly, he has had the pressure of managing this pandemic, and I think the job has been the hardest job in government over the last year and a half, and I'm not sure any health secretary will ever have faced anything like it. And it's still at a relatively young age, but there's no excuses. You know, he's been at the centre of this. He has done the best he can to manage it, and I think the country has acknowledged probably the good work, as the Prime Minister did in responding to his resignation letter, that he's done in his achievements, not only now in the pandemic, but going forward in gaining the biggest ever spending agreement for the NHS that there has ever been. And that is going to be his legacy. But unfortunately, this will cast a huge shadow on what he's done at this stage, because the trust that he was responsible for with the British public has been severely broken by this human act of his. And we do have to bear in mind, we want politicians to be absolutely perfect, but they're not robots. They will reflect society. Society is never perfect, and they will make mistakes. And he has made a fundamental mistake. And I think the consequences for him. But yes, as Christina is saying, absolutely for the families involved are what we also should care about at this point, and probably give them that time that they'll need after this. And I think he personally, I know, needs some time to take a break as well.
Many saying that, you know, his credibility has been completely destroyed, and future career possibly, although the Prime Minister in his letter to him said, you should be immensely proud of your service. I'm grateful for your support and believe that your contribution to public service is far from over. That's from the Prime Minister, but the Sun headline is saying Matt finished, Christina.
Well, of course, he's not finished. I mean, if honour was something that mattered in the politics of this country, then clearly we wouldn't have Boris Johnson as our Prime Minister. Ethical matters are of minuscule concern to him. We know that when Priti Patel was found to have bullied staff, then in an independent report, he just dismissed the report and kept her on. We know that when Robert Jenrick breached regulations, he kept him on. This is not a government that holds honour very high. And Boris Johnson, I think, in spite of what Dominic Cummings said in his leaked WhatsApp messages, Boris Johnson, I think, probably does have quite a lot of respect for Matt Hancock. He's a hard worker, if nothing else. And also, I think Boris Johnson is someone who doesn't like being told what to do. So he he won't like the fact that his own authority has been undermined in this, and he will probably be quite keen to have Matt Hancock back at some stage. So I don't think we need to weep too many tears about Matt Hancock's political future at this point.
OK, Christina and Kulveer, stay right there. We are going to take a break. Coming up after the break, Sajid Javid returns to the Cabinet. We'll be discussing all of that and more. Do stay with us.
We're desperately trying to make England the first country in the world that by 2030 has 0 new HIV transmissions. Now, it's a very brave thing to do, but I think when you're setting targets, it's very important that you set very brave targets. And I think to do that, we need to raise the awareness around HIV and the understanding, because we're from Tackle HIV, we recently done a new survey, and we understood from that survey that nearly half the people who we surveyed thought that they didn't need to take part in a HIV testing day because they felt that they weren't at risk of HIV. Now that assumption then means that people assume that people who are affected by HIV are just people from the LGBTQ+ community, or black African men, black African women, and that really isn't true. That really isn't factual. So for us to get to that brave target, for us to get to England being the first country with 0 new HIV transmissions, we need everybody to be tested. Therefore, we need to eradicate the fear of testing. The reality is that from 30, 40 years ago, when the public health warning was put out, and people felt like at that moment they learned and understood everything they needed to know around HIV and around AIDS. And the reality is that kind of underground in the last 30, 40 years, science, medicine has moved on and advanced so dramatically that I, as somebody now living with HIV, can live a very happy, normal, healthy life taking 1 tablet a day. But the reality is that people feel that they already know because of what they learned 30, 40 years ago, and it's very difficult to re-educate people on a subject that they already know about, or also to get them to converse about a subject that actually they don't really want to talk about, because it's always been shrouded in a bit of a mystery. It's always been shrouded in darkness. We need to celebrate where we are at the moment with people who are and the medicine about living with HIV. We need to be able to celebrate how advanced and how far medication has come. But sadly, so many people still think and act in the way that people did 30 or 40 years ago, and that's something we need to really work on to change.
We are at a breaking point, and we need to work now and fast.
Even though young people are vulnerable to the impact of climate change, young people can also become the change agents that we need to address the climate impact. In my campaign or in my advocacy work, I work largely with young people so that their voices can be heard, so they can also influence decision making from the local level to the national level. And thankfully, we are making progress in that regard.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. Still with me, journalist and author Christina Patterson, and former advisor to Boris Johnson, Kulveer Ranger. Let's go to you first of all, Kulveer. We'll have a look at the Daily Mail. The headline there, Hancock quits his job and marriage. But they're also throwing ahead to the new Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, making a dramatic comeback, they say. Would you agree? You know the inner workings of the Conservative Party?
Yes, well, it appears Sajid was not so much far away, but on the subs bench, it's been well known in Westminster that the Prime Minister was keen to have him back. He's hugely respected. He's already previously been Business Secretary, Home Secretary and Chancellor. Unfortunately, lost that battle with one Dominic Cummings when he stepped away from being Chancellor. And I think that there was always felt there was unfinished business. He has a lot to add. He has a lot of experience. And I think, as we all know, probably the job in government as we continue to go through this pandemic, someone with this much experience could not be ignored for the role. So that's why I think the Prime Minister has made the decision to bring him back.
Christina, meanwhile, mentioning Dominic Cummings there, as Kulveer did, he's tweeted tonight saying hashtag need regime change, that Sajid Javid is simply more of the same.
Well, I agree with Dominic Cummings about the need for regime change, but the fact that he was a very, very central plank, if not the second most central plank in that regime, slightly undermines his message. It's a very nasty tweet, actually. He implied that had Sajid Javid remained at the Treasury, then the whole thing would have been a mess. There would have been no furlough, that his special advisors were hopeless. As we know, one of Dominic Cummings, I think, was lost an employment tribunal. I may have got this wrong, against one of Sajid Javid's aides, who Dominic Cummings fired for no ostensible reason. So, I mean, nasty piece of work, Dominic Cummings, but even nasty people can tell the truth from time to time. And I think a lot of what he has said in that select committee and in releasing his WhatsApp groups and on his incredibly verbose blog has the ring of truth. But my feeling about Sajid Javid is that he is a man of integrity, and not least because, while practically everybody else in the cabinet took every compromise that came their way, swiftly dropped their allegiance in terms of the referendum, claimed they'd been born-again Brexiters from the beginning, like Liz Truss, who was, of course, a Remain supporter before she became a born-again Brexiter. He actually had the integrity to resign when he was told he wouldn't be able to keep his team of aides. So who knows how he'll do the job, but I think he is a man of integrity. He's a man of honour. He's very capable, and he knows this is a very big job. So fingers crossed, because it couldn't be more important. The pandemic is not over, tragically, and let's hope that he does a good job.
Kulveer, very quickly, we're running out of time, but back to the Sunday Times, and they've got a story about Colin Hancock using a private email when he should have actually been using an official email for COVID business.
Yeah, Gillian, as soon as Secretaries of State, ministers leave their roles, all kinds of stories come out. And this one about private email. I know for a fact that Matt Hancock was quite surprised, shocked at the antiquated state of some of the technology in the NHS. He wanted to move that forward. I think there was something around how he wanted to use different types of platforms. But he was always someone who was ruffling feathers in terms of wanting progress. I think, full of beans was how he's described. I think Christina said, and I agree with that, he will be back. He's probably got a lot still to give. He's still a relatively young man. So, I think he needs to learn from this situation, take stock, look what happens with and around his personal life. But he will come back, and I think he's still got a lot to give to this government and this country, and hopefully that will help him going forward.
Kulveer and Christina, thank you both.